Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, inviting you to join me on this journey. There are stories that live quietly in the background of our lives, stories we only glimpse when someone we love finally finds the words to tell them. For Eric, that story unfolded at a Christmas table just 18 months ago. It was where he learned, not just in fragments, but in full, the truth of how his parents survived. They fled Cambodia as a young couple, crossed into Vietnam, and when war and politics closed in again, they risked everything on a boat journey across dangerous waters. For months, they lived in a refugee camp, uncertain if safety would ever come. And yet, through all of that, they reached Australia and began the painstaking work of rebuilding a life in a language they didn't speak, in a country they didn't know. Eric grew up in the shadow of that resilience without fully understanding its depth. He was one of the first Asian kids in a working-class school in the 1980s Ferntree Gully, navigating racism and belonging without yet knowing the courage that had carried his family across oceans. I understand that silence too. My father returned from the Vietnam War carrying trauma he rarely spoke of. It took me decades to recognize the ways his unseen pain shaped our family, just as Eric's discovery reframed the quiet strength his parents carried. Today, Eric is not only the son of survivors, but a storyteller and a community builder, creating spaces where untold voices find light and connection. His story is one of resilience, identity, and the transformative power of finally hearing the truth. Eric, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you to Suddenly Different.
Wow, thank you, Leigh-Anne, for the amazing intro. I'm very privileged and honored to be your podcast guest today.
So, Eric, can you take us back to your parents' story of their lives in Cambodia before they fled? What did they have to leave behind when they crossed into Vietnam?
Yeah, so from my understanding, Leigh-Anne, they were, I think, in their late 20s, so they were still quite young. And my dad was a bookkeeper at the time, and my mum was a nurse. So they just had, regular occupations. And from their accounts, they told me that when the regime of the country took over, anyone that was considered intelligent or some type of white collar worker, the authorities at that time did some really horrible things to their citizens. So as a result of that regime, a lot of Khmer nationals had to escape the country. Well, most of them fled the capital and they went into the jungles to hide. So my mum and dad had to escape their country of origin, Cambodia, and they had to leave Phnom Penh at that time. So they crossed over to the border into Vietnam. And that's where I was born.
So you've got a young family. You've got a pregnant woman and an expectant father who should have been able to live a beautiful life in their home country, but because of violence, prejudice, and politics, were at risk of being killed. And I know I've been to Cambodia and I've seen some of the places that are kept open so that people can learn that this is unacceptable behavior of humanity, is totally unacceptable. And even though it's confronting, it is so good that they haven't swept it under the carpet. because I know it is confronting, and I know that people don't enjoy going there, but I felt it touch my heart. I cried so many times, and I found that the people in Cambodia were so beautiful, and all of them had stories of how it had touched their lives. When you had that Christmas conversation, hearing the story in full for the first time, what was the moment that stopped you in your tracks?
That's a good question for me, Leigh-Anne. I was quite curious at that point in time because obviously growing up, I heard fragments of our origin story. So, mum would say, oh, we had to jump on a boat when you were really small. And then dad would say, oh, we spent a couple of months at a refugee camp. And then mum would say, oh, this is how we came to Australia. So for me, I heard fragments of this puzzle, and I was really curious to actually understand the end-to-end journey. And I wanted to understand for them as parents what it was like to go through that ordeal. So back at that Christmas, when I flew down to Melbourne, I was quite intentional. I said, look, I really need to ask you about this and what actually happened. Because as a kid, I got little tiny pieces, but for me to be able to sit down with them, Leigh-Anne, and understand that full end-to-end journey with all its gruesomeness was quite moving for me. And it was moving from the fact that these people, my parents, they endured these horrific events just so that I could have a better life.
And that is phenomenal. I know that parents do commit to do whatever it takes to look after their children and to keep them safe. But we're not always tested in the same way that your parents were tested. There was a whole nother level for them. So what do you know about their escape, the boat journey? Because you were a child. So were you a babe in arms during that boat journey?
Yes, yeah. I wasn't two yet because when I came to Australia, I think I just turned two. So I was something like 18 months at the time. So I was still in mum's arms and quite small. And the way that it came about was during those difficult times when the political disruption took over, the Vietnamese people, they had to, find safety elsewhere. So once again, my parents had to consider, leaving the country that they thought would be safe for the next couple of years. My mum told me that my grand auntie knew some people at the port who were able to, arrange transport. And back in those days, it was quite a secretive affair because you would have to pay some small amount of money uh, to get on the boat. So I believe that my dad exchanged pretty much his life savings or everything that he had in terms of monetary value into pieces of gold, and then he paid the boat captain that money to be able to get on that boat really late in the night. So it was the biggest life-changing decision that he probably had to make, because staying would mean that you're going to be oppressed, you're probably going to have a high mortality rate. So the best thing that he could do for the family at that time was to seek safety outside of the country. And yeah, that's how they did it. One night, the families gathered, and they boarded onto a commercial fishing boat, which had a couple of hundred people packed in like sardines. The way that he described it, it's pretty raw to listen to the way that he described it.
Can't imagine, because I do remember being a young person in Australia and seeing the news of boat people. And because my father had fought in the army in Vietnam for Australia, was aware of Vietnamese, because my father actually wanted to adopt one of the Vietnamese orphans. He was so affected by what he'd experienced in Vietnam. He desired, like, with all of his heart, but unfortunately my mother didn't agree and felt that the child would be disadvantaged in Australia, so it wouldn't actually necessarily give the child a better life. But my father was hell-bent on doing something because he'd seen the everyday Vietnamese people and how they were impacted. And he wasn't drafted. He'd joined the army to see the world, and he was just following orders. So I really, I feel a great connection to this. And so I would notice the news about the boat people, and I lived in an area that a lot of Vietnamese came to later, Springvale. But did you, like with the refugee camp, because you're lucky you got safely anywhere to any country.
Mm,
Do you know which refugee camp you ended up in?
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a step back a bit
Yeah.
as well, Leigh-Anne, because I didn't share the voyage, and yeah, that was, to my parents' account, was quite horrific. So imagine you're jumping on a boat with other families. They're quite desperate. It's really cramped. It's an old rickety commercial fishing boat. So that set out to sea, and I'm not sure if the captain had intent on sailing to a specific destination. But if you could imagine this, during that sea voyage, there was very little shade, when you're up
Yes.
above. All right. So my mum said when she went above, when she wanted to, grab some fresh air and sunshine, she could only stay there for a certain period of time because it was just so hot, and the sun was beating down on my delicate baby skin, so she could only go up for a bit of time, and then she had to go down again. And then within the confines of the boat, it was really cramped, and a lot of the other refugees were standing shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe. So if you could imagine what that would be like in those conditions. But then there were some really horrific things that happened during the voyage. So my mum and dad, they said that during the voyage, because they were passing through the part of the sea where it was close to Thailand, and they said that the first time there was another boat which they weren't sure who or what it was, but it came very close to our boat, and it was coming pretty fast, and it didn't look like it was stopping. So it actually rammed the boat several times. And it's young children, elderly people. So they rammed the boat, and obviously that distorted people and they went off balance. So if you could imagine what that would do. And these,
Fine.
yeah, terrifying. And they came on, that they were masked, they had machetes, and they demanded whatever they could, money, watches, rings. They rounded everyone up and they ordered everyone to put anything of value into some sort of pit. So mum told me that that happened and how fearful she was um, when the pirates, came to attack the boat. So that was the first time. And then I asked them, well, how many times did this happen? And then, they were counting on their fingers, and I said, oh, we think there was up to 8 pirate attacks. Yeah, yeah, this happened repeatedly. So sometimes they didn't ram the boat, sometimes they would just come on board and see what they could take. And then she said after the 7th or the 8th time, there were some women that experience sexual violence. And unfortunately, some of those women, instead of being confronted, with these barbarians, mum said they just, jumped off the boat.
Goodness.
Yeah, so it was quite sad to hear and to understand that someone having fear of their own life had to do that is just really scary. And yeah, that's what they told me. To be on that boat was just so scary. Just the pirates, but the risk of drowning. And
Yes.
I think the end they said it was about the 2.5 or 3 days that they were sailing, they were running out of food. So, there's a risk of starvation there as well.
My goodness, the things that people like your parents were silent about, these things, the atrocities they've witnessed. I can't even imagine how they felt and the nightmares and all of that are just totally, totally inhumane, totally inhumane. And I'm sure that there was nothing left to give them. There was no food. I could imagine. I think if I'd been assaulted and knew that there was a potential another one coming, I think I'd jump off the boat too. I don't think you can just sort of accept those sorts of things. Those poor people.
Yeah.
And
So
with the and the children witnessing it. Oh my goodness.
yeah, so young babies,
Yes.
children,
Yes.
elderly people, they had to all be witness to that. It's like a horror movie, being played in so slow motion on silent. I couldn't imagine what that would have been like.
Absolutely not. So then you kept going, or they kept, well, you did keep going because you were a babe in arms, so you were there.
And so the turning point or the termination of the sea voyage was when someone spotted land, and when they approached the shore, they were greeted by the authorities, and that happened to be on the mainland of Malaysia. But then my dad said that these authorities weren't very nice because they knew that this this boat, contained refugees, and they were treated in such a way. My dad remembers, everyone got ordered to put their hands on their heads and then marched off the boat. And a lot of the times, if the authorities captured the boat, they would sink or destroy the boat. And yeah, my dad told me that after we landed, we got sent to the refugee island. It's called Pulau Bidong. It was the main detention center for Southeast Asian refugees at the time. So that island housed hundreds and hundreds of refugees from the mid 70s all the way up to the early 80s. And my dad said when he landed on that refugee camp, it was like an open sewer pit. So if you could
Yes.
imagine, Leigh-Anne, that
Yes.
there is no sanitation. So you've got urine, you've got human excrement on the floor and tents everywhere. There was no sanitation. So from what my dad described, it was worse than third world conditions. And yeah, he basically said that we were treated like animals and just detained in this environment.
And I'm speechless. My heart is racing from hearing this. I can't imagine how at that Christmas table, how your parents were feeling telling you and how you were feeling hearing it. Like it is beyond my imaginings of how it was. So it is far, far worse than I have ever imagined. So you're in the refugee camp, treated like animals, not cleansed. I'd say minimal food at best because human rights wouldn't have been upheld, especially at that time.
So true. My dad said one of his memories of the camp, Leigh-Anne, was he would have to wake up early and line up sometimes hours for food. And at that time, he lost a lot of weight, a couple of months, maybe 2 months in. So waiting in line for rations like some rice and small piece of meat, some vegetables. that's all you got. And he had to take that back, feed myself, and then give some to mum. And that's what life was like. So the hours turned into days, the days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into a couple of months. And by that time, I think mum said that she could see the ribs sticking out of his body because it was just so thin and emaciated. And unless you had money with you at the camp, you couldn't buy anything, you just got given what you got given. So just the basic food rations. There was some humanitarian support, but as you mentioned, it was very, very limited and not not well organized and refined at that time.
So you
So
say you were in the camp for a few months. So
yes,
I was so pleased when you stopped at months and didn't go, and months became years. Because I do know that there are times when refugees are in refugee camps for years. So your father, it sounds to me as though you would not have survived the conditions had it have turned beyond months into years.
yeah, true. Lack of food, boredom. So if you could imagine being in that environment, from what I understand, there could have been hostilities between some of the families just from the smallest things. And when there is nothing purposeful or meaningful and you're just spending days waiting, it can feel like an eternity and it can feel like there is no hope. It can feel that every waking moment is in desperation. But there was one turning point. So one day, one of the humanitarian officers called my dad to the office, and they asked my dad to sit down. And my dad said at that time he didn't understand much English, so they just sat him down and that they presented some papers to him. And then he looked at them really strange and he thought, well, why are they doing this to me? And with his broken English at the time, he picked up a few words and a few sentences. And one of the statements that they said, congratulations, Leigh-Anne, the Australian government has accepted you. And he kind of looked and he was a bit perplexed at what that meant. But it actually meant that was our ticket to freedom. So if you could imagine 3 people waiting in this camp for a couple of months and having to endure the sea voyage, and now he gets this piece of information which is going to change the trajectory of his life. It was one of the most special, surreal, and heartfelt moments of his life that we're going to actually live in another country.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine with broken English, barely understanding, but hope has now returned.
Yes, yeah, hope and joy and everything has returned. And it was quite, I think, mixed emotions for Dad because he'd struggled for the majority of his life and to escape 2 countries, hop on a boat with his young son and my mum. This was actually the turning point for him. He was nervously excited. He didn't even know where Australia was. I mean, he knew about the US and Britain, but not
Yeah.
so much about Australia. So a couple of weeks later, we boarded a flight destined to Melbourne, and he was talking to me and he was saying, look, this is the first time I ever flew on a plane. So it was like a wide-eyed moment for him and like a kid in a candy shop because yeah, he'd never flown on a plane before, let alone been to an airport. So that was quite a big deal. But yeah, leaving the camp from what they called home for the last 100 plus days was kind of surreal as well. And so he was contemplating or reflecting what the future was looking like on the plane and staring down at me as a small baby. And then mum at that time, she was expecting as well. So that was a godsend that we got this gift from the universe to live in a new country. And he said something like, as soon as I landed at Melbourne Airport, I almost kissed the ground because it just felt like all my dreams and my hopes came true. So it was just the most elating experience that he had, just to arrive in a brand new country and then just knowing that he was going to be safe, or we were going to be safe.
The joy that, yeah, that I'm sure there would have been trepidation, but like there was a future ahead now.
Yes, yeah, a future ahead, a bright future. Was scary for him being in a non-Asian country, not knowing how to speak English. He didn't know how to drive a car. He didn't know anything about Australia. So yeah, one moment you're struggling to have food and survive, and then the next moment you get a roof over your head and arrive in a peaceful country with beautiful people that welcomed him.
So, how did they manage those first fragile years in Australia? I'm sure it would have been a culture shock for them because we are an acquired taste, us Aussies. So, how did they learn to survive and rebuild without being able to speak English or having any connections?
We arrived at a hostel in Box Hill, and Mum and Dad said there would be people from the church that would come and they would offer food, but they would take the families out for picnics and things like that, which I thought was really beautiful because the real connection or the bond was with those first people that my mum and dad met. And there was one lovely couple, their name was Karen and Robert, and they were the first Australian family that my mum and dad ever met. And so this couple of a similar age, they had a couple of kids back then. This actually formed a lifelong friendship. Not only did, they help my mum and dad, learn to drive and navigate shopping and doing all those things when you arrive in a new country, but then they invited us to Christmas one year. So I think we got a photo together of our families when we were celebrating Christmas. And at one point, our families were living together when we moved into our house in Ferntree Gully. And now that is like a 45 plus year friendship. 4.5 decades on, we still keep in touch. We celebrate all the good things, the birthdays and new grandchildren being born. So it just
Beautiful.
goes to show that even in the midst of adversity, there is a silver lining that came out of this. And to have that friendship for so many years, I think it's just it's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Absolutely wonderful. So, so you've spoken about being one of the first Asian children in your school in the 80s. I can't imagine that that would have been particularly easy. Can you share about how that has shaped you and how it affected how you saw yourself in Australia?
As one of the only Asian kids in primary school was quite tough. In prep, there wasn't anyone else which was from an Asian country. So I was definitely the only Asian kid at that time in my small primary school. And I remember having friends and other kids that I would get along with, which was really brilliant. But then I remember a couple of times in the schoolyard where I would get teased or bullied because of my ethnicity. And that really hurt at that time because when you're young, your sense of identity is not very strong. And it kind of fractured my self-confidence in many ways because in one instance, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like some of the other kids, but I knew that I was different and I knew that mum and dad and I was born in another country. And I never ever said at that time that I was a refugee. I always said, oh, I was born in Vietnam and I don't know how I got here type of thing. So even at a young age, I kind of hid that part of my life and I didn't want to share that. And yeah, certainly I did experience some racism at that time, but I kind of feel that it does fracture you in a way because it pulls on the notion that you're not good enough. And then when you think that you're not good enough as a kid, it fractures your self-esteem so that that carries on into adolescent and adulthood. Um, and yeah, other than that, I think as soon as I got to high school, yeah, there wasn't that much bullying or racism anymore because it was quite normalized when some of the other families started to filter through and things were quite multicultural at that time.
So, how did learning the full story of your parents' journey shift the way you see them and yourself?
For me, Leanne, it shifted my identity in terms of I need to honor the miraculous journey that my parents had to overcome. And it made me truly grateful for who I am and for who they are as, parents to be able to overcome all of those obstacles earlier on before we came to Australia. But then that was half the battle. They had to then um, resettled in a country that they weren't familiar with, learn English. They worked in factories. At one time, they were doing their 9 to 5 job and they were doing textile manufacturing out in the sunroom, like sewing clothes to earn money. So they were like, I remember as a kid because I was helping them. And yeah, they were working sometimes, 6 days a week straight with just the Sunday off. So it's just amazing their drive, their resilience, and their intestinal fortitude. And look, they paid off the house, I think, within 8 years or something, all on wages. So it's just amazing just to witness what they did.
Extraordinary humans. So, what was the moment you decided to stop waiting for community to appear and instead take up the challenge to lean in and build community yourself?
I think a couple of years ago when I went through relationship severance and I became a single dad, I kind of realized that life is really short and I should take every opportunity that presents itself. And really, my parents set me up for really good foundations. I graduated from university with double degree, got a good corporate jobs for the most of my professional life. But then you have this inkling or this yearning to be able to give back and to do something meaningful. So I was thinking about how I could honor their journey or their memory. And so I looked at public speaking and storytelling. I considered writing a memoir. So all of those things, that was the shift for me, Leanne. That was the moment where I kind of thought, well, you've done so much for me. I have to do something in return or more so preserve that legacy because my son and my nephews they won't understand or appreciate that journey once they're gone. So I kind of looked at some ways which I could share that memory with other people. So that's why I leveled up with my public speaking. I went to Speakers Institute and I did some one-on-one coaching, and then I tried to share my story more intentionally. And last year I shared my origin story at the Stories That Stir Brisbane event. So that's a platform which allows individuals to be able to share their lived experience based on a theme. So my theme was on resilience, and it was the first time that I shared this story in front of a large public audience, and they really resonated with the message. So I'm really appreciative that I got the opportunity. So that was a shift for me. It was like it's now time to be intentional and not hide in the shadows anymore.
Such an important story to tell because the majority of people in Australia would have no inkling of what you've just shared with us. And it's easy to take for granted what we have in Australia, right? We are the lucky country. No matter what individual instances occur, we are a very lucky country. And it is wonderful that we have such a broad range of different cultures in our country. It's what makes us so special. So if you could speak to your younger self, the boy being bullied at school, what would you want him to know about now, about your family's courage and your own courage, the things that you've overcome?
If I could coach or mentor my younger self, I would say nothing has boundaries. Don't limit yourself by your surroundings, dream big, and particularly to the younger self that got bullied, I would have said, look, this is just going to be temporary. And yeah, don't have any animosity to those people because maybe they're a little bit closed minded or they weren't brought up with the right mindset. So I would say be unbounded with your dreams. Don't hold yourself back and make sure that you share your story with purpose. And I certainly resonate with your sentiments, Leigh-Anne. We are so lucky in Australia. We have so many opportunities, and with the diversity of cultures, that is something that we need to celebrate, and that's part of our DNA. And so the story of my parents' origin is woven into the fabric, and so many other stories of refugees or migrants that come to this country, and we need to really honor and celebrate that more. And I know in recent times that certain minorities which don't think that way, but the majority, I believe, we're a very fair. People are really helpful in Australia, and we look after our mates. So the younger version of me, if I would have gone back, I would have said to not limit myself, don't be held back by some of the negative things that people have said, because, yeah, your limitations are only bounded by what you believe in and what you can do. And certainly my parents' origin story, that when I reflect back on it, it's just an amazing journey. And if they can do and overcome what they had to do, like, yeah, you can do anything.
That's right. And it is very easy for us to worry about the small stuff, right? And when you look at facing a life and death moment every day, every part of that journey, going from Cambodia to Vietnam, life and death, going from Vietnam on a boat, life and death, pirates, and then the lottery, winning the lottery to come to Australia. And I know that the world is wrestling with immigration and belonging and who owns this land and who does that land and who's entitled. And it is very sad. It is very important for us to sit back and go, actually, we're all humans, and how can we work together on these problems? So finally, what is your vision for the kind of community that you would like to shape for the future?
I'm very passionate about giving back to the younger generation. They are the key to growth for our society, whether it be academically, professionally, or in industry. So during the last couple of years, I've been quite intentional to become a mentor. So I'm a mentor for first year IT interns at my company, and I'm just there for them to hold space, to give them advice, and for that younger version of me, which, felt a bit self-doubted. So I'm just there to help them along their journey. So that's one thing that I'm really passionate about is my mentoring. And the other aspect is my involvement in Stories That Stir. So not only have I become a participant, then I became a host and MC of that platform. And I just feel so privileged and honored to be able to curate a lineup of very unique, diverse stories that have so much meaning for the wider public. And it's just a beautiful experience just to be able to bear witness and absorb their lived experience. And I just feel so uplifted after those interactions. So I wish to continue that. And yeah, who knows? I might write a book about my own journey. So that might be in the pipeline. And then I'll keep doing my public speaking engagements, which I enjoy, because I feel that in this day of AI, Leigh-Anne, people can feel quite disconnected and fragmented in that virtual space. So the key to overcoming that is in-person connection, being able to connect with people, being able to just listen to them. And that's one of my other hats is a mental health support person within my company. So if anyone needs, if they're struggling, they can just have a chat, and I'm quite open about that. And I did quite a bit of men's work in the last couple of years where I looked at my own personal self-development and different pillars within the men's work framework to help other men, because we tend to be quite isolated and not share our emotions. But I'm encouraging men in my community to do the opposite, to have a sense of ownership in their emotions and to celebrate being vulnerable, showing empathy, and then just having wider compassion for the world.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, having met you multiple times now and shared wonderful training rooms and different organisations that our lives have collided into, I know how amazing you are, how generous of spirit you are, and how by you holding the space for others, you make a huge difference by being you. And then you tell your story and you make an even bigger impact. So, Eric, thank you for bringing us to the heart of your family's journey. What you've shared reminds us that survival is never just about crossing borders or surviving oceans. It's about finding the strength to start again, to raise children, and to carry on when silence seems easier than telling the truth. For me, your story also echoes the quiet truths I discovered about my own father's service in Vietnam and the way hidden pain shaped us both. And perhaps that's the greater lesson here. When we dare to listen, to ask, and to hold space for stories long unspoken, we don't just uncover history, we uncover ourselves. To our listeners, the invitation is simple but profound. Ask the questions you've never asked. Listen with compassion to the stories that shaped your family, because sometimes the most suddenly different moment of all is when we realize that our story began long before we were born. Thank you, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you kindly, Leigh-Anne, for having me. I really love this enriching conversations, and keep shining, my friend. You're doing some amazing work with this podcast. And yeah, I just love your energy and sense of curiosity and compassion that you bring to the world. So thank you kindly once again.
Thank you, Eric. This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.